So hi everybody, whatever time it is in the world for you. So my session today is on resiliency, disaster recovery, and survivability for teams. My name is Randy Chapman. I work as a UC architect at Simity. I also blog and podcast at UC Status, and I'm a Microsoft MVP coming on 3 years. Just a bit more about me there. I've got all of the kind of the badges as most of you will have as well, I'm sure. Or let's just get on with it. So what's the session about really? I mean, Teams has become the operating system, as it says there, for businesses. It was launched about 4 years ago, and really it didn't do a lot at the time, and it was kind of hot on the heels of Scout for Business, which was the replacement for Link and OCS, LCS, and kind of a legacy that goes back 20 years. And the Microsoft UC stack has become really synonymous with how businesses run. You know, there's a lot of businesses that are either Microsoft or another, so Cisco or something like that. But, you know, Teams usage has grown enormously. You know, only in the last year, they've doubled the amount of users from 75 million daily active users to 145 million. And a lot of that was caused by the COVID effect, you know, people going home and being sent home by their governments and having to replace that solution in their offices and be able to use whatever technology they need from home. But really, regardless of, you know, how you use Teams, you know, everything, all the communications lines in Teams are absolutely mission critical for some businesses. You know, there's 4 pillars of communication inside of Teams. There's, you know, messaging. Obviously, there's meetings. There's collaboration, so Teams channels, apps, and connectors, and those sort of things. And of course, there's telephony. And all of these things will have different levels of importance for most organizations. So really, the considerations that you want to kind of adopt when you're looking at resiliency and disaster recovery is what types of communications can't you do without? What types of outages are there that you're potentially gonna run into? How you use Teams and where do you use it from? And then really, in terms of resiliency, how far do you go, or how far can you go? And the answer is you can start really simple and really kind of go as far as you want, or as deep as your pockets are really, into the resiliency side of things. So the types of communications, as I said, we've got, you know, chat and conversations. So chat is that old instant messaging presence stack. You got conversations inside of channels, whether it's with internal or external through federation or guest access. You know, all of that is pretty fair game. You got file access. So file access in Teams either lives in OneDrive if it's your sort of one-to-one chat, or if it's in your communication in your conversations inside of a channel, it lives in SharePoint. And you've got meetings. So a meeting not unlike this. So that it could include just, you know, normal Teams meeting where people dial in online, or it could also include, you know, video, you know, using rooms, people joining from the web. But it can also be audio conferencing and, you know, people dialing into a, you know, a kind of a conference bridge, if you like. And then you've got calling. So this is, you know, calling could be anything from internal peer-to-peer calling between 2 colleagues or a person and their customer through federation. But it could also be, you know, PSTN telephony, so using calling plans or direct routing or something like that to actually connect Teams to the outside world, so you can call a mobile number or what have you. Calling is one thing I'd wanted to call out is, you know, regarding calling, what's more important to you as a business? Is it your outbound telephony or is it your inbound? And the reason I ask really is, you know, outbound, you know, everybody has a mobile phone these days. I mean, everybody's kids have mobile phones these days. So outbound telephony shouldn't be a problem. You can always make a call, assuming you've got a mobile signal wherever you are, your mobile's got battery and all that kind of stuff. Inbound is a lot more kind of contentious, because it's the numbers that everybody's used to calling you on. Those are the things that you need to make sure that can land on your desk, so to connect your customers and suppliers and whoever with your business. You know, the numbers on your website, the numbers on your business card, the numbers in your LinkedIn profile, etc., all kind of land where they need to, and that's the thing you want to really mitigate for. And then there's the types of outages. So, is it a Teams outage? Is it a Microsoft 365 outage? So, Teams is pretty rock solid, but it also is a customer, if you like. It has a lot of dependencies on the whole Microsoft 365 stack. So the whole content delivery network. There's Azure AD for authentication, and really the outages that we've seen, are typically, apart from a couple of certificates and things like that, the outages we've seen typically are actual sign-in. So Azure AD has a momentary blip while something happens, and if you're signed in, you're typically okay. But if you're in the middle of signing in, or you sign out, maybe a tenant switch or something, and go back in, that's when you can have an issue. You've also got a full location outage. So it could be just the internet. Sorry, the connectivity is next, but the location could be just power. It could be an evacuation, could be, any number of things, but also just, with the working from home kind of scenario, that really doesn't come into it, because everybody's kind of sticks in the wind and working from wherever they happen to be. And then of course you got connectivity. So, your internet goes down, your SIP lines go down, that kind of thing. What do you do about that? So how and where do you use Teams? So obviously you can use it from a workstation. So the Teams desktop client runs on PC, Mac, and Linux. I don't know anybody that actually uses Linux Teams on a daily basis, but it is there. You got the mobile client, which I think is a really good way to use it, particularly when you're remote. And that could be also a tablet, so an iPad or an Android tablet, that sort of thing. Of course, you got meeting rooms, so you got Microsoft Teams rooms on Windows or Android running inside of a meeting room. You've got desk phones, so full native Teams desk phone apps. Teams displays is another kind of use case there. And then where do you use it? Obviously, you've got the office, you've got, sort of anywhere. So me being a consultant, before COVID, really, I was traveling around a lot. And, the amount of times I'd join a Teams meeting on, guest Wi-Fi from a train station or a motorway services, or even just a Wi-Fi hotspot that I carried around with me, and ran a Teams meeting and shared PowerPoints and things from a mobile or a client on an iPad or my Surface tablet or something. I've had meetings really anywhere, and then of course you've got from home, and that's kind of the vast majority of where we are. So Stephanie's asking on desk phones. Yeah, there are Teams desk phones. We can add a link to that and the resources around it. So there's desk phones available from all the vendors. So Poly, Yealink, Audio Codes, quite a wide range, and of course Crestron with a new range of audio and video phones. So the next thing is connectivity, and what do you do if there's an outage? So I'm just going to go back one slide. So connectivity, you got to think about connectivity as, in your office, you've got your internet connection, you've got just the LAN itself, you've got power, you've got lighting, the PCs themselves, that kind of thing. All of that really leads to the connectivity. If you're using Teams through a local internet connection from your office, the recommendation obviously is to try and reduce the friction as much as possible, so that there's little or no barriers between yourself and the Microsoft Content Delivery Network. So remove things like VPNs and proxies and those sort of things. But that aside, if your internet goes down, then you're kind of stuffed. You can't connect to Teams, then really you can't do a lot. So my recommendation always is to try and double up your connectivity, whether you're using MPLS in the old school days or SD-WAN, make sure that you've got, local internet breakout, but also just resiliency when it comes to that breakout. So what happens if there's an outage? No, wait, so I skip ahead, yeah. So there's four things that you've got to consider. So you've got chat and conversations, and you can use things like Teams offline mode. So what happens when you lose connectivity or you want the internet connection from your laptop? Teams will go into offline mode, and it'll still allow you to browse around. And if you've got files synced, for instance, that goes onto the files section, and the next one, if you've got files synced, you can get at the files you need inside of channels, and of course your OneDrive syncs locally anyway. But chat and conversations, you can still kind of browse around a local cached copy of all of that, and even respond to messages either in your sort of one-to-one, one-to-many chat, or in your conversations. And then when your connectivity actually springs back to life, those messages will spool and kind of be sent. It's like the old offline mode in Outlook, where you send and receive to get your internet connection back, and everything would go into your outbox and be sent there. Files, of course, you've got the offline access and sync. So one feature I really love in SharePoint inside of Teams is that sync button. And if I'm working on a project and I need to get at the files that are inside a particular channel for a project, it's usually a lot more than one project, but I'll hit the sync button, and what that does is it adds a link to my own corporate OneDrive, and I can get at that folder and all the files that are in there offline. And also, I'm still pretty old school when it comes to file access. Browsing through a website, isn't really the most efficient use of my time. So, going through Windows Explorer, I think, in my opinion, is much faster and easier. Go and sort of double click on a bunch of breadcrumbs to get to a particular place, open a file, save it, and then it syncs back when I'm back online. And then, of course, you got meetings. So if you can't get to Teams and you can't do your Teams meetings, then, well, you've got the alternative really there is to go face-to-face. Obviously with COVID, nobody's doing face-to-face meetings anymore, or not a lot of people are doing face-to-face meetings. Or the other option is just to go audio only, just use your mobile on a conference bridge or something, or just reschedule. Obviously, there's, the other extreme is to use another meetings platform. Some people have multiple meeting platforms to try and mitigate risks with using one platform for everything. And then, of course, you got calling. So with calling, you've got a few different elements of resiliency. You got business continuity. So that's what happens if something happens, sort of trying to move over to another location or something. You got disaster recovery, and then you've got GSM calls as a kind of a last ditch. As I said, everybody's got a mobile number or a mobile phone. You can always make and receive calls on that if you needed to. So voice resiliency is really the next thing that I wanted to talk about. And what I mean by voice resiliency is it's this ability to continue making and receiving calls no matter what. That's inside Teams or outside Teams. It doesn't really matter. How far can you go when it comes to resiliency for Teams? So I mentioned connectivity before. So if you've got an internet connection, obviously you've got wired and wireless. Most laptops and PCs have a network cable or a plug for your network cable to plug into the corporate LAN. If the switch that you're plugged into goes down, obviously you can back up and go to Wi-Fi. Most people use Wi-Fi anyway when they're roaming around and going into meeting rooms and taking notes and stuff anyway. So automatically switching from wired to wireless is definitely the way you want to go on your laptops, surfaces, that sort of thing. Obviously, backup internet. These days, internet is actually quite cheap when you think about it. Either have 2 circuits from diverse carriers and diverse data centers, or even just go cheap and have your primary connection on something all singing, all dancing, and then some sort of DSL type thing for a backup. Mobile hotspots. I have one anyway that it's on another carrier that I carry around with me. And if my internet at home goes down, I can use that as a backup. But when I'm traveling, in hotels, in motorway services, or train stations, or airports, or whatever, and still having to make Teams calls, to use the mobile hotspot for everything. Of course, you can also tether off your mobile itself. So most carrier plans come with either a large chunk of data, or these days, a lot of times it's unlimited data. So, you can go ahead and tether to your heart's content. And with the advent of 5G, it's, sometimes it's even faster than browsing from home anyway for a lot of people. And then just mobile working in general. So forget your laptop, just go to the mobile. The Teams client on the mobile and the tablets is absolutely phenomenal. Tenant switching on there works really well. You can get at pretty much everything you need to do, albeit on a smaller screen. And then you've got the desk phones. Yes, these are our Teams desk phones. Most of the Teams desk phones have wired and wireless connections, so the same thing for a laptop. If you default to a wired connection where possible, because you're going to get the best experience possible, and then if that LAN port goes down, or the access to the internet from that LAN port goes down, it'll automatically flip over to Wi-Fi. You can also power these phones, or most of the phones are powered over PoE through that network socket. You can also get external power supplies and power the thing from the mains. So you could just go mains power and Wi-Fi onto the network if that's the way you want to go. And people that have desk phones at home, or Teams desk phones at home, which is probably few and far between. Most people use a laptop. A lot of people don't have PoE switches and stuff like I do to connect the desk phones. So typically you'll just join to your Wi-Fi anyway. And the Wi-Fi could be your primary internet. Again, it could be that hotspot on your mobile, or your little MiFi dongle or something like that. Some of the phone vendors actually have what's called dual registration. The picture that I've got in there is a Yealink phone. It's an easy configuration. It's just in the web UI. There's a tick box or a slider or something to enable dual registration. So what happens with that is when you're in Teams mode, you'll see a little SIP button, a little round button in the bottom left corner, I believe it is, that if you hit that, it will effectively flip the phone from Teams mode to SIP mode. And then in SIP mode, you can actually just register against an SBC or something like that. So if Teams goes down, but you still have connectivity to the session border controllers and the gateways and the voice infrastructure in your network, you can flip over to a SIP mode on the phone and still have your calls come in and go out if you need to. And that's really simple kind of continuity. Audio goes one step further, but only really on their 3-pip phones right now, is they'll use a proxy on some of their kind of voice infrastructure on the back end to detect the outage and actually flip the phone over to SIP mode automatically, which is a really, really cool feature. Poly, I believe, have dual registration, again, still only in 3-pip mode. As far as I know, Crestron don't have anything like that, at least right now. But the Yealink, yeah, definitely has that kind of dual mode. And then the infrastructure itself, obviously you've got inbound number redirect. So a lot of the carriers these days actually have the ability to redirect numbers. So either on a manual basis, so call them up, or go through a web portal or something and say, right, okay, my telephony platform is down. I need all my numbers to go through to this other alternate line and alternate number. Some of them even have web portals where you can actually go and control number by number exactly what happens and what number to redirect to. So it could be, a person's DDI will automatically redirect to their mobile number, for instance. It could be, a set of alternate lines or another set of DDIs. Really, the choice is yours. You can manually invoke these, or you can also, in some cases, actually set up an automatic redirection. So Gamma offers something called SIP Trunk Call Manager, and you can actually set up effectively hunt groups and things inside of STCM. And in the event the lines go down, you can actually invoke this kind of disaster recovery scenario where the numbers redirect automatically to pool of other numbers and that sort of thing. Of course, you've got resilient lines. In the old days of PSTN and ISDN, that was a lot more difficult because effectively you've got an NTE or network termination equipment on the wall. It's powered from the green box out in the road. And if that goes down, you're kind of stuffed because all your numbers live there. You'd have to get BT or whoever your carrier is to go and forward the numbers to something else. But nowadays with SIP, you can speak to your providers and actually get resilient SIP infrastructure, SIP lines. You can go, start with active standby. So you've got 2 SIP trunks into 2 different bits of voice infrastructure or SBCs. In the event the primary one goes down, all the numbers and everything flip over to the secondary kind of offline SIP trunk, and you continue working. Your SBCs, I would would always recommend going active, having them always up if possible, or some sort of hive mind between a pair and HA pair, that kind of thing, with automatic flip over for the kind of on-prem world. Then you've got active with SIP trunks as well. So variations on that could be both SIP trunks are actually active and connecting to two different SBCs, but what's active is a subset of numbers. So let's just say 50% of your DDIs are on trunk A, 50% of your DDIs are on trunk B, and trunk B is the resiliency or standby trunk for the numbers that live on trunk A primarily, and vice versa. So if there's an outage of one of the trunks, only 50% of your numbers have to kind of have that DR and kind of flip over to the other side, which is quite interesting. And then the last one I've got there is branch survivability, and really that's the kind of the new sexy feature with Teams, and I've got the kind of arrow there to allude to there being more. So what is a survivable branch appliance? It's a really old term. It kind of goes back to the Link 2010 days. An SBA was an appliance typically inside of a session border controller. It could be a server blade or something like that. Or in a lot of cases, I mean, when I started off doing Link 2010 projects, it was a Dialogic gateway living on a Dell, some sort of Dell server, and it was kind of the reverse. The server was the SBC, and there was a line card or something like that, and you build the SBA actually on the whole server itself. Nowadays, in appliance mode, the SBC is a box that is a gateway that connects to ISDN, SIP, whatever you want. But then inside of it is a tiny little card that is a full server, and you can run different applications. And the newest one is this SBA thing. So I'll kind of explain really what the SBA is in a second. So to go with to actually do an SB, sort of bring up an SBA for Microsoft Teams, you need to talk to one of the qualified vendors. So AudioCodes, AnyNode, Ribbon, and Oracle right now. I don't know if the list has been added to just yet. They all do them in slightly different ways. So AudioCodes, Ribbon, and I believe Oracle use that server blade kind of thing in their hardware SBCs. AnyNode don't actually have an appliance. Theirs is effectively an application, a Windows application that just runs on a PC or server, and the SBA kind of module, if you like, is just an add-on or something that actually lives with it. Obviously, you need telephone lines, whether it's local ISDN or some sort of direct SIP. There's some Teams configuration to do, and it only works right now on the Teams desktop and Mac client. It doesn't work on phones, so that is probably going to be coming. I don't have any timeline on that. So before I go into how it works, really what we want to discuss is, what is the SBA actually mitigating? So if you think about, if there's a Teams outage and you can't connect to Teams, this is where you want to start thinking about the SBA. So you need to make sure that your infrastructure actually supports what happens when you don't have a connection to Teams. So if you've got a SIP line using the same internet connection as your connection to Teams, then you're kind of stuffed, because if your internet goes down and your SBC is inside your branch office and you can't connect to Teams or your SIP trunks, then you're kind of stuffed and the SBA won't help you. So just make sure that your SBC can actually still connect to the lines, and of course you have line of sight to the users themselves. So it's mitigating a Teams outage, whether that's over the internet or whether that's just Teams being down in general. That's what it's trying to do. So how does it work? So it's using what's called a back-to-back user agent, and effectively it becomes a local proxy for all of the Teams settings in your branch office. So it uses the Graph API to effectively sync all of the settings from Teams. So these are things like your PSTN usages, voice routing policies, caller ID policies, all the normalization rules, all the ports that you use, but also things like PAI headers and call history. So all of that is saved locally and synced back. And there's this constant sync that's working that is always updating these settings. It uses what's called SIP options to effectively fork the teams and the media to the SBA and the teams in parallel. And if teams goes down, it returns some sort of option, and the SBA kind of in normal operation, the SBA will reject the calls. But when the options don't get returned, then the SBA will kind of spring to life, and all the media goes through that. We've got a pretty picture in a second. The SBA policy uses media bypass, so it makes sure that the media goes from your Teams client to the SBC itself or the SBA module and then out. So you need to make sure that you configure media bypass. So normal operation, a little pretty picture here. So on the left, you've got a Teams user. They place a call. Typically, it'll go over the internet and go out through Teams, and then it'll find its way to your SBC, etc. The dotted lines there are all the registration stuff and the user data import. So effectively going from Teams through to the SBA, syncing all those settings that I mentioned before, and making sure that it's able to kind of almost act like it is Teams, or at least from the voice perspective, if there is an outage. The normal operation, the call will go from sort of the user to Teams to the SBC, and out through your line provider, or if you've got a connection from your SBC to your PBX, as it says up there, and then it'll kind of fork across to that way. Then when there's an outage, effectively, this little red cross down here, that outage info is synced back to the SBA. The SBA goes, right, yeah, I'm here, I'm ready, I've synced all the data that I need. The call will go, instead of to the SBC, it'll go straight from the user and then proxy through the SBA and then onto the SBC and then wherever it needs to go. It allows some very specific features, so inbound and outbound PSTN calls. I believe they've also added the ability to make internal calls between users in the same branch. You've also got call controls, sort of mute and unmute, hold, resume, DTMF, that sort of thing. And then there's a lot of features that aren't available. So think about things that really you can't dumb down and kind of packetize and put onto the SBC itself. There's things like multi-party calling, call forwarding, and ensemble ring. Being able to kind of control those features, all your auto attendance and call queues. That's no new thing. That's kind of always been the case on the SBA. You go into what's called limited functionality mode, and then you start to use things that way. So what's the user experience? Effectively, when the internet goes down or your connectivity to Teams goes down, you'll get this banner. There's no internet connection. Calling, including emergency calls, is only available to and from phone numbers. That message might have changed ever so slightly with the advent of going to internal users. And then when you make a call, you get this other pop-up that says, you've got no internet connection. Calling is only available to PSTN numbers, as it says there. And really that's it. You don't have to worry about it. The user doesn't have to do anything to the Teams client. It just automatically kicks in and starts to work, which is, I think, really, really cool. So how do you do the SBA configuration? So as it says here, you've got to make sure that you configure your SBC for direct routing. That's a given. And you have to enable media bypass. That's a requirement. So the media will go straight from the Teams client to the SBC and not go out over the internet to Teams and via the media proxies and out to your SBC that way. You've got to make sure that your Teams client can communicate with the SBC. So there's no point actually having an SBC and SBA that isn't routable to the actual user. So typically you put this in the branch, on the same or a routable LAN as the user themselves. And there's some specific ports, as you can see there, that you've got to make sure that you can open up for communication and also media. You need some DNS records to point to your SBA, so that sba.domain.com. You'll need some Teams configuration, and I'll show you what that is in a minute. And you need to register an SBA as an application in Azure. It uses an app registration to facilitate those sync and graph connections and all that sort of thing. And then you need to configure your SBA, which is on your SBC, to effectively connect and use that Azure app to sync down all that information from the graph. So the Teams configuration is really simple. I've kind of dumbed this down to one slide, really. It's just a couple of lines of PowerShell. Use the Teams PowerShell module, assuming it's working, depending on the version you're actually running. Or I know the Skype Online PowerShell is kind of gone, but some people still are using it until it kind of completely dies. But you create a new SBA in Teams, so new CS Teams Survivability branch appliance, the FQDN of that DNS record you created, and then some sort of description. You need a policy, and then you need to grant that policy to a specific set of users. So Marty McFly is lucky enough to have an SBA policy, and of course an SBA that he can use for resiliency there. And this is just the one slide that shows you all the different steps for the app registration, but I like to do it with pictures as well. So in the Azure AD portal, you've got something called app registrations and then new registration. You give it a name, and then you just tick some specific boxes. So accounts in this org in a single tenant. Make sure it's using web redirect to a specific URL, and then press register. Then you save that, or you tick a couple of boxes, the access tokens and ID tokens down the bottom, and press save. Then you go to API permissions. And again, some very specific configurations. Just search for Skype, and then use the Skype and Teams tenant admin API. Click on application permissions, and then tick the box down the bottom for the SBA appliance, and then press add permissions. Then you need to grant admin consent to make sure that there is admin consent and you're actually allowed to do all this. Then there's a client secret, so there's no point actually, using what were the old days would be service accounts type of thing, where you'd have a user account. Nowadays, it's all done with client secrets, so some sort of app registration and effectively a very long password that's unguessable that you'll use to actually facilitate that connection between the two. Again, very specific settings there. And then once everything's done, you'll have that app registration, you'll have that kind of SBA there, the client secret and everything is all current. And that's really it. So on the previous slide, I did say this kind of last step, you need to make sure that you copy the values to the clipboard because you'll need them later. And this is the only time you can actually do that. Once you've pressed save or kind of exited out of this, that client secret becomes completely secret. So if you haven't saved it to a text file or something like that, then you pretty much need to start over again. Only takes a minute or two, and you can kind of delete what you've created already. So it's not the end of the world, but really you want to do it once. And the SBA listed there. And then you go and configure your SBA. All the SBC vendors will have some sort of wizard-driven SBA setup process. So this example is an audio codes box. It's just a wizard, kind of next, you add some details and finish. All of them will be very similar, and they'll all need the same sort of settings. So you'll need the FQDN, so that sba.domain.com. You'll need an IP address for the SBA to listen on for SIP transport. So that's just usually a local IP that's accessible between the SBC and SBA. You'll need an SSL certificate, which you've already got if you've got direct routing, or if you're using a wildcard or you're using a SAN certificate, make sure that it has all the names. If you have a specific certificate for the SBA, then of course make sure that it has the right name, etc. And then you'll need that application secret and ID again that you copied from that previous session, or that setup for the app registration. And that's pretty much it. I don't have a there's just a couple of screens. You press next, and finish. Really enter the details, and the SBA is set up. So that app registration will kind of spring to life. The DNS record and the SBA kind of in Teams, and then of course the SBA setup actually on the SBC and the module itself, all kind of kick in. And really, the only way to test it is to wait for a Teams outage. Fingers crossed you never have one, but really that's the long and the short of it. It's not particularly sexy, but if it's something you need, and a lot of people say they need that kind of belts and braces resiliency, I would say the SBA is a really good thing to do. Are there better ways to do it? If your internet goes down, go home and go to Starbucks and use their internet, and that'll work. But if Teams is out and you really can't get anywhere, SBA is a really good choice. Dual registration on phones, I think, is probably equally good, albeit not automatic. And really, you can only use that from a desk phone. You can't use it from your Teams desktop client. So, kind of horses for courses, really. So my final thoughts really on this session. Resiliency is absolutely totally possible for Teams. That's whether it's offline mode or variations on that. Obviously, you've got the different levels of resiliency for your connectivity. You've got dual registration for phones, of course, your voice infrastructure itself, and then the SBA as a last. I wouldn't say last thought, but it's certainly a thought, a way to go. You need to decide what's critical to your business and how far you want to go to actually mitigate against an outage. And then really, I would say start simple, double your internet connection and then kind of go from there. And then if you really want to go all in, go for it. Just means you need, if you've got centralized voice infrastructure, means you need decentralized voice infrastructure for those mission critical sites. You don't need an SBA at each of your branches, probably. There might be one that's, really mission critical. Maybe your contact center lives there, that sort of thing. So, really start with the areas of your business that can't wear an outage. Again, I've been Randy Chapman, Microsoft MVP. If you have any questions or need anything, you can always email me on randy@ucstatus.com. Check out my blog at ucstatus.com. Also, my podcast lives there as well. I'm on Twitter at Randy Chapman, and again, I work at Simity. I'm going to mention them because they've given me the time to actually do this presentation, of course.